Hello, everyone. Today we will be covering Chapter 1, which is basically an introduction to anatomy and physiology. With every chapter, I'll begin with just some roots, prefixes, and suffixes that you will need to learn throughout the chapter. Some of them you already might know, like, for example, cardi means heart. Um, Ology means the study of, psychology, biology. NAS, nasal, can pertain to the nose. Some of these you might not know, which is why you're taking this class. All right, so just be familiar with these as we go through the chapter. We will talk about these, and you'll definitely need to know these. All right, so one thing that I will let you know is two things. One is that the things that are underlined will be on your quiz and or exam. So, but I don't want you to only memorize the underlined information. Because it might take 4 slides worth of underlined information to figure out what the answer is going to be on the exam. There's 2 types of questions on the exam. There's what I call the easy questions, the 2 plus 2 equals 4 questions, and then there's the critical thinking questions. So the easy questions could be just a simple definition. What does CRAN mean? Well, it means pertaining to the part of the skull that surrounds the brain. That would be a 2 plus 2 equals 4 question. But if we're talking about a physiology-based question, you might need to kind of dig through a bunch of slides worth of information in order to kind of figure out, one, what the question is asking, and two, how do you come up with the answer? So, a lot of students will just memorize, or some students will just memorize the underlying information, and that'll get you about a 60% on the exam. So I don't recommend that. The other thing is download the slides to whatever device you're using because I use the speaker notes sometimes, and there's information in the speaker notes that will give you additional information. I updated these slides, and I tried to remove a lot of information out of the speaker notes and put them back up into the slides, but we'll be covering some questions throughout this course, and so I would put the answers to the questions down in the speaker notes. So, or I might put some mnemonics, which are just ways to remember certain things or various structures down in the speaker notes. So anyway, all right, so let's just jump right into it. So anatomy. We're covering anatomy and physiology. Anatomy is just basically looking at something. It's derived from a Greek word just means to cut up. It's the observation of the human body and its body and its parts. So if you're looking at the aorta, which is the big vessel that comes off of the heart, if you're looking at the femur, which is the big bone in the leg, or if you're looking at a slide under the microscope, you might be looking at simple squamous epithelium. And we have various structures that might not be common in all people. Females have different reproductive organs than males do. Athletes have a better cardiovascular system and more blood vessels than non-athletes do. Some of us have more bones than other people. Not everyone's ears look the same. Not every male has the same amount of facial hair. So there's just some different examples of how we all look different. Physiology, on the other hand, takes that anatomy and looks at how those anatomical structures function. So it's basically derived from the Greek word meaning relationship to nature. So how do these anatomical parts function? So how do temperature changes affect the rate at which heart beats? Typically, if you get cold, if you're hypothermic, your heart might beat slower. Or cardiac muscle, your heart tissue is under involuntary control. You don't have any control over how fast your heart beats. And it is fatigue resistant. Your heart muscle doesn't get tired out. All right. So anatomy and physiology are very closely related. That's why we have AMP1 and we have AMP2. It's not like we study just anatomy and then we study just physiology. And physiology actually depends on the structures of anatomy. And it's very difficult to separate anatomy from physiology. And we're, just like with any science, we're always learning and discovering new things that are happening in the realm of anatomy and physiology. And one thing on here that I mentioned that is that certain cells in the small intestine have the same type of taste receptor proteins that are found on the tongue that detect sweetness. And we'll get into some more next chapter when we talk about chemistry that I actually just read this morning. All right, so levels of organization. So I will say you're going to need to know this slide in and out. So all materials are composed of these things called atoms. So atoms, that's what we find on the periodic table. So we're going to kind of start here. Atoms, that's what we find on the periodic table. Hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, helium. But we have these things called subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, and electrons that make up cells. And we'll talk about that next chapter. And then we also have subatomic particles. If you ever watched The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon will go off on, the quarks and the neutrinos, which, we're not covering in this class. That'll be an upper level chemistry class, which we're not covering. But subatomic particles, when we combine a bunch of protons, neutrons, and electrons together, we'll make up atoms. And then when we combine atoms together, we're going to make molecules. So water is H2O, so it is 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen. Glucose is C6H12O6, which you don't need to know that for right now. We'll discuss glucose in a subsequent chapter. So it's C6, so it's 6 atoms of carbon, C6H12, 12 atoms of hydrogen, C6H12O6, 6 atoms of oxygen. Make up glucose. Carbon dioxide, CO2, C, 1 atom of carbon, and dioxide, di means 2, so 2 dioxide, CO2, 2 atoms of oxygen. And when we combine molecules together, we form these things called macromolecules, such as DNA, protein, starch, cellulose. We'll talk a lot about proteins and macromolecules in subsequent chapters. Organelles. Organelles, we'll find a lot of organelles kind of inside the cell. And for those of you who've taken Biology 1000, which should be everyone, because that's a prerequisite to this class, you should be familiar with the different organelles. Basically, organelles are just composed of aggregates of large molecules, macromolecules, and they have very specific activities. They're found in many types of cells in our body. Every living organism, not just humans, has these things called organelles. When we get to the cell is the basic unit of structure and function in all organisms. We have muscle cells, we have nerve cells, we have red blood cells, white blood cells, kidney cells, liver cells. And when we have a bunch of cells that work together to form a common function, we say that that's a tissue. We have adipose tissue. That is basically fat. We have simple squamous epithelium. That's a type of tissue. We have nervous tissue. We have connective tissue, like your ligaments, your tendons. And when we have a bunch of tissues that are working together to form a common function, we say that that's an organ. Your skin is an organ, your heart is an organ, your kidney is an organ, your stomach is an organ, your small intestine. And then when we have a bunch of organs working together, we say that that's an organ system. So, like for example, your digestive system is composed of your mouth, your esophagus, your stomach, your small intestine, your large intestine, your rectum, anus. And then finally, when we have a bunch of organ systems working together, that constitutes an organism. And in our case, we're talking about humans. So like I said, know this slide in and out. Here's a picture version of what we just talked about. Now, some textbooks will kind of go beyond the organism. So here we stopped at organism. Some textbooks will actually go beyond organism. You don't have to know this, but from organism, we might go species, population, community, ecosystem, biosphere. We're going to stop at organism. We're not going beyond that. But anyway, you'll need to know these slides in and out. All right, and every once in a while, we'll throw in, the book will throw in these random clinical applications that really don't have any purpose of being where they are placed. But anyway, we'll go over them. Some of them I won't go over, some of them I will. Basically for this one, all we're talking about here are ultrasounds and MRI. So ultrasounds, basically, if you've ever had an ultrasound, they put that jelly on you and they put the probe on you and kind of look at whatever that they're looking at. But ultrasounds are actually going to look at soft internal structures. So if you've ever had a baby, you've had an ultrasound, it's also called a sonogram of the fetus. MRIs actually look at internal structures. You can have an MRI of the brain, MRI of your, let's say you've had a herniated disc in your back. You would have an MRI of your, let's say, of your lumbar vertebrae. But MRIs or magnetic resonance imaging, they're going to use radio waves. All right, so just some key concepts about anatomy and physiology. We've talked about cells being the basic unit of structure and functions. All living things consist of cells. And we have this internal environment. It's this environment within the body. It's what's going on within our body. We have this definition, which we'll talk about later on, called homeostasis. And it's basically the textbook definition, maintenance of a constant internal environment. It's basically our body's internal zen. And we want everything to go back to or to be in homeostasis. We want everything to be kind of within normal limits. We want our heart rate to be normal. We want our blood pressure to be normal. We want our red blood cell count to be normal. We want our white blood cell count to be normal. We want our blood glucose level to be normal. And cells depend on each other. We'll talk later on about, how our cardiac cells, our cardiac muscle cells work together. How we have that, our heart works and we have, two atria and two ventricles. And we go, when our heart contracts, it goes that lub dub, lub dub. That's an example of how our cells depend on each other. And as we said before, with anatomy and physiology, with the structure, anatomy, and function, physiology, everything is going to be interrelated. All right, underlying mechanisms, gradients and permeability. We're going to save this statement. Cells move from a high to low, down pressure, concentration rate of rest, permeable membranes. We're going to save this statement for when we talk about diffusion, osmosis. I think y'all are familiar with diffusion. You drop a sugar cube in a glass of water, and eventually the sugar cube dissolves. That's basically a concentration gradient. Like I said, we'll save that statement for a later time. Or, you're in the back of the classroom and you spray some perfume in the back of the classroom, and eventually, if I'm standing at the front of the classroom, eventually I'll be able to smell that perfume. That's an example of diffusion and going down the concentration gradient. Anyway, like I said, we'll save that statement for later. Cell differentiation, specialization of cells due to genetic expression. All cells contain a nucleus, with the exception of red blood cells. And all nuclei have the exact same DNA in it, but due to genetic expression or gene expression, it's what makes a kidney cell, which is very different from a nerve cell, which is very different from a liver cell. And we'll see the different types of cells and how they look. They're going to be very different in their structure, and obviously they're going to be very different in how they function. A liver cell cannot act as a kidney cell. One, they're not going to migrate from the liver to the kidney, but two, they cannot act as anything except for what they are. And again, that's due to genetic expression. Cell membrane mechanisms. We'll talk about entry of substances and response to signals. We'll talk about that when we get to another chapter about what can come into a cell and how things come into cells. We have receptors on cells that will allow cells to communicate with each other. We'll also talk about these feedback loops. We have negative feedback loops and positive feedback loops that we'll talk about this chapter. And again, everything goes back to homeostasis. We want our body to be stable. And the way we do that is through these things called feedback loops. We want our body to be in balance. If we get dehydrated, we want to replace that water loss. You've just gone for a run, you've sweated, you need to drink some water, you've lost electrolytes, drink some Gatorade. Or if you've just eaten a big meal at Thanksgiving, you need to get rid of some of your excesses. You need to go to the bathroom. Energy processes keep cells active. We'll talk about this when we talk about glycolysis, citric acid cycle. This is cellular, it's called cellular respiration. It is how cells use glucose to create energy. And energy is ATP. Assimilation. Assimilation is basically changing of absorbed substance into different chemical forms from how they entered the body. Basically, I think we all know or we've all heard that amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So basically, we ingest, we eat amino acids, and then our body will build proteins. That's an example of assimilation. And then I just talked to you about, we use glucose to make energy or ATP through a process called cellular respiration. All right, some characteristics of life. We have several characteristics of life. One is growth. Obviously, you're not the same size as you were when you were born. So we know that we have to increase the number of cells that are in our body as we get older. And also, we have to increase the number or increase the size of our cells as well. So increase in cell number and size, which will allow our body to grow. And we also have to be able to respond. Responsiveness is another characteristic of life. We have to be able to sense those changes that are occurring in our inside of our body as well as the outside world and react to those changes. You have to be able to see the baseball coming to you, and you have to be able to catch it or move out of the way. You have to be able to move out of the way from danger. And those changes that are occurring inside, usually most of the time, about 99.9% of those times, we don't know about those changes that are occurring inside of our body. And like I said, those are our feedback loops that we'll talk about later on this chapter. And those are all going to be things that are happening on the subconscious or unconscious level. We don't know that those changes are happening, and we don't know that our blood sugar is getting too high and that our pancreas is dumping out insulin. Unless you're a diabetic and you monitor your blood sugar and you give yourself insulin. But in a normal person, we don't know that that is happening. Movement. We have to be able to change our body position or location. When you go to sleep at night, you don't wake up in the exact same position that you went to sleep in. Our internal organs are in a constant period of in a constant motion. When we digest food or when we eat food, our stomach is constantly churning and breaking up that food. And then our small intestine is doing this thing called peristalsis, which we'll talk about later on, and moving food down through the small intestine into the large intestine. Reproduction. We have to be able to produce new offspring in order to continue life. But out of all of the characteristics of life that we'll talk about, reproduction is the only one that is not required for, I guess, me to continue my life. It's only required to continue the human species. So just remember that if you see this on a test or on a quiz, that reproduction is the only one that is not required for me to continue living. All right, another characteristic of life, metabolism. Metabolism basically is all of the chemical reactions that occur in an organism that support life. We talked about energy production, utilizing glucose to make energy. We call that cellular respiration. And we use that with oxygen. Basically, when we use that oxygen that we breathe in to release energy from food. A lot of times, we'll say that we need oxygen to live. We need oxygen um, to provide life. Well, yes, that's true. But if we're talking about cellular respiration, we need oxygen to release that energy from food. And when we talk about cellular respiration, I believe it's in chapter 4, we'll see that oxygen plus glucose will yield that energy. Digestion. Digestion is how we bring in that food and break it down into usable nutrients for absorption into the blood. We have, carbohydrates, lipids, um, which are basically fats, and we have proteins. Carbohydrates will eventually get broken down into basically sugar. Lipids will eventually get broken down into these things called triglycerides, which is glycerol and fatty acids. Proteins will get broken down into amino acids. And then we also need vitamins and minerals as well. Circulation, we have to be able to move substances throughout our body. That's going to be your cardiovascular system. Excretion, we need to be able to remove waste products, not necessarily by pooping, or if now that we're in anatomy and physiology, we would say defecation, but sweating. Sweating would be an example of removing waste products. Urination or peeing would be an example of removal of waste products through the kidney. All right, requirements of organisms. In order to survive, what do we need in order to survive? We need water, food, oxygen, heat, and pressure. Water is going to be the most abundant substance or chemical in the body. And we need water in order to survive. It's going to be the most, the major component in the extracellular fluid. And I'm just going to skip here. So we have cells. Basically, any fluid that is inside of a cell is called intracellular fluid. Intracellular fluid. Any fluid that is not inside of a cell is called extracellular fluid. So this fluid right here would be extracellular fluid. This fluid right here is extracellular fluid. The fluid that is in your bloodstream is extracellular fluid. And we'll learn later on that the fluid that is outside of our cells, the extracellular fluid, depending on where it is, has special names. So the fluid that is in our bloodstream, we call that plasma. The fluid that is kind of in our tissue space, interstitial fluid. So if you've ever heard of edema, your ankles swell. Or if you ate too much Chinese food and you have too much salt in your system and your fingers swell and it's hard to get your ring off, it's because now you have too much interstitial fluid, too much extracellular fluid in your tissue space. All right, so water, major component of the extracellular fluid. Environment for metabolic processes. Again, we'll see this in cellular respiration. required for transport of substances. Obviously, the cardiovascular system, your blood plasma, regulation of body temperature. When you sweat, um, you're going to release some water with some salt, and the wind blows and it cools you off. Another requirement, food. Obviously, we need to eat food in order to survive. Oxygen. Remember that now we don't need oxygen to breathe in order to live. We need oxygen in order to release that energy from food. And remember that energy is in the form of ATP. ATP is going to be our energy. All right, we also need heat. Helps maintain our body temperature. We'll learn later on that when we break down ATP, one of the products of breaking down ATP is going to be heat. So when you're cold and or mildly cold and you start to shiver, when you shiver, those muscles break down ATP and release some heat. Hopefully, that will warm you up a little bit. Pressure. Uh, we won't go too much into pressure into this class. It'll definitely be for next class, for AMP2. I'll definitely kind of go off on a tangent about atmospheric pressure or about hydrostatic pressure and protein pressure in preparation for AMP2 when we talk about blood flow. So we'll talk about how pressure is a requirement of organisms kind of later on. All right, so I mentioned homeostasis is that maintenance of an internal stable environment or your natural body zen. Basically, it's self-regulating. And we have these feedback loops that I mentioned before, which we'll talk about here in a couple slides. And basically, it happens without our knowledge. Your blood glucose level, what's your thyroid doing, what is how is your red blood cells doing? If your red blood cells are too low, if you're a little bit anemic, then your body might secrete a protein called erythropoietin, and then that will stimulate production of red blood cells. And within 3 to 5 days, you should see an increase in your red blood cell count. So pretty much like if you go to your healthcare provider's office and you get your blood drawn and you get your printout, pretty much everything on that printout is going to fall under this homeostasis, this self-regulating mechanism that is kind of works in the background that we don't know about. And this homeostasis exists when pretty much everything that we just talked about, water, nutrients, oxygen, pressure, when everything is within a certain range. So, think about your temperature, 98.6. And we have a set point, 98.6, but we also have a range of what our temperature can be. And if our temperature falls out of a certain range, then our body's going to do something about it, which we'll talk about here in a few slides. Anyway, so this homeostatic mechanism, there's 3 parts to it. We have a receptor that's going to detect and provide information about that stimuli. So I'm going to use blood glucose as an example. Our cells have these receptors on them that will detect what our blood glucose level is. And it's going to say, and then it's going to, convert that information into electrical impulses and send that information up to the brain, the control center. And I'll tell you right now, one thing that you will have to know is this thing called the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is where all of these feedback loops get processed through. Hypothalamus is going to be where these feedback loops get processed through. So it's going to go to the control center, which is typically going to be the brain, and if you want to be more specific, the hypothalamus. And that's going to be the decision maker that maintains the set point. And it's going to say, hey, here is my blood glucose level. Is it normal or is it not normal? And then from there, if it's normal, the body's going to say, okay, we're done. We don't need to do anything about it. And then in a split second later, it's going to receive information from another receptor saying, hey, now here's an updated blood glucose level. Do I need to do anything about it? Then the control center is going to look at it and say, nope, we're still within normal limits. We're good to go. So this is happening constantly, several times a second. Now, let's say that our blood glucose eventually falls out of range. Let's say that it's now our blood glucose level is way too high. Our decision maker, our hypothalamus, is going to decide that, yep, our blood glucose level is too high. We need to do something about it. So, and we're not going to talk about how all this happens yet, but our hypothalamus will eventually, send a bunch of signals through a bunch of different pathways, but eventually we're going to have this effector, which is going to be a muscle or a gland that responds to that information that was sent out from the control center. So in this case, that hypothalamus is going to send out a bunch of information, and in this case, the pancreas, remember we have high blood sugar, high blood glucose level. So the pancreas, which is a gland, is going to dump out some insulin, which is going to cause our blood sugar to lower. And then we're going to repeat the 3 steps. We're going to have that receptor, control center, effector, and as long as our blood sugar is still out of whack, if it's too high, we're going to continue dumping out insulin until our blood sugar is within normal range. So kind of here's a picture version. We have those receptors, and that information is then sent to the control center, which is typically going to be that hypothalamus, where it's going to compare whatever we're looking at to that typical set point. If we're talking about our temperature, we're going to compare it to 98.6. And then if something needs to happen, it's going to send signals to that effector, which is always going to be a muscle or a gland. So I already mentioned the pancreas. So let's say that we're hypothermic, we're too cold. We might shiver. And I used that example earlier. We might shiver, and when we shiver, we break down ATP. That ATP will release some heat, and hopefully that will warm us up. All right, so what I've been talking about so far is actually a negative feedback loop or negative feedback. And it's the most common type of homeostatic mechanism. And it's typically required to maintain this stable internal environment. It's basically, it says it's called negative because the response to the change moves the variable in the opposite direction of the deviation of the set point. All right, so what does that mean? Basically, something is too high and we need to lower it, or something is too low and we need to raise it. That's all negative feedback is here's your set point. Something is too high. We need to raise it back to the set point, or here's your normal. Something is too low. We need to raise it up. That's all negative means. Is we need to move it. If it's too high, we need to move it in the opposite direction. We need to move it in the opposite direction back to its normal set point or normal range. If this is normal and now we're too low, we need to increase it. We need to move it in the opposite direction back towards its set point. So I've used this example, secreting insulin after a meal because your blood sugar is too high. Your blood sugar is too high. We need to dump out some insulin to lower your blood sugar back to its set point. I've also talked about shivering. When your body temperature falls below normal, here's your normal, here's our body temperature. We need to raise our body temperature, so we're going to shiver, break down ATP, and hopefully raise our body temperature back up to normal. Another example, increasing heart rate and force of contraction when blood pressure falls. So this is going to be a tricky one, and you'll learn more about this next semester. But what will happen when your blood pressure starts to drop a little bit, so your blood pressure drops a little bit, we need to increase your blood pressure. So what's going to happen is we're going to see your arteries, tiny arteries, kind of constrict a little bit, and other arteries dilate a little bit. And we're also going to see the heart rate jump up a little bit. And when your heart contracts, it's actually going to give a little bit more oomph. Your heart's going to contract more forcefully. And that's going to send the blood through your arteries at a more forceful rate. And what that will do is increase your blood pressure. What we're actually doing is increasing your stroke volume, which increases your blood pressure. But like I said, we'll talk about that next semester. All right, so this is just a picture version of your temperature and negative feedback loop. You can look at this one on your own. We're not going over that one. All right, positive feedback. So positive feedback, it's kind of uncommon in the body. It's very short-lived. Basically, it's called positive because if here's our set point, what we're doing is we're going to move that deviation away from the set point in hopes that we're going to reset the body back to normal. So it's positive because we're moving it away, and hopefully from moving it away from normal in hopes that we reset the body. It says that we will produce temporary unstable conditions, but eventually we will reach homeostasis. So that change is going to be intensified, but eventually we will go back to homeostasis. So blood clotting. When you cut your finger, we have, white blood cells and platelets. So we'll just talk about platelets for a second. Platelets are going to kind of rush into wherever that cut is. Well, you're still bleeding. More platelets are going to rush in. So here's our normal platelet count at a typical place in our body. Now you cut your finger. More platelets rush in. Well, you're still bleeding. More platelets rush in. 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 Now your bleeding has stopped. Well, now we're not going to, since your bleeding has stopped, we're going to kind of be done with sending more platelets to that cut. So now we've kind of reset the body back to where it was. We've produced temporary unstable conditions, but now we're back to homeostasis. We've stopped the bleeding. We've actually intensified the condition, but we've gone back to homeostasis. We've reset the body. Another one is uterine contractions during childbirth. Now, this one is going to be a little bit more difficult, just because you haven't had the endocrinology chapter. That'll be, the first chapter of next semester. But what happens during childbirth is baby's head will kind of push on mom's cervix, which will send signals to the brain to dump out this hormone called oxytocin, which will go to the uterus to start contractions. Well, now those contractions will push baby a little bit more down the birth canal. The baby's head will push on the cervix a little bit more, send signals to the brain, more oxytocin, more uterine contractions, more baby's head pushing on the cervix, more signals to the brain, more oxytocin, more uterine contractions, more baby's head on the cervix, more signals to the brain, more oxytocin, more uterine contractions, more baby's head on the cervix, more signals to the brain, more oxytocin, and the cycle is going to continue until baby is eventually until we have enough oxytocin, the baby is delivered, and now there's no more baby's head pushing on the cervix, no more signals to the brain, no more oxytocins being released. So now we've reset the body's system. So again, we've produced temporary unstable conditions, but we've reset the system. We've reset the body's system. So I hope that wasn't too confusing. And we're not going to talk about retention of fluid, leading to more retention of fluid, but just know, just kind of memorize this one because it's underlined, So we're not going to talk about the physiology behind this. The physiology, you'll get that in AMP2. But you're going to have to know this one. We'll talk briefly about this one in a subsequent chapter. So just remember, negative is something's too high, we lower it, something's too low, we raise it. Positive feedback, we keep going, and eventually we reset the system. Another thing, this one for uterine contractions over here. Another example of positive feedback is when you put a microphone next to an amplifier and it kind of reverbs and kind of amplifies that sound. All right, so our first question. So you accidentally cut your hand. Blood platelets in the area begin to attach to the broken vessel walls in the wound. What happens next to create a positive feedback mechanism? So, the platelets sticking to the broken blood vessel signals the blood flow stop to the area, which stops the bleeding. Okay, so that is actually a true statement. The platelets change shape and encourage more platelets to rush in and stick to each other to form platelet plugs to seal a broken vessel. All right, so that one is a true statement. The sensation in your pain, the sensation of pain in your hand causes your muscle to jerk your hand away from danger. Okay, well, that might be a true statement, but that has nothing to do with uh, stopping blood, stopping the broken blood vessel. So we're going to get rid of that one. That has nothing to do with anything. The platelets send signals to the brain to slow heart rate and slow the bleeding. Well, no, we don't slow the heart rate. We don't slow the breathing or bleeding. We don't slow the heart rate. Now we're going to get rid of D. So now we're choosing between A and B. So the platelets sticking to the broken blood vessels send signals to the blood to stop flowing to the area, which stops the bleeding. Or the platelets change shape and encourage more platelets to rush in and stick to each other to form plugs that seal broken vessels. So if we go back to the question, basically it's asking positive feedback mechanism. So A does not address anything with positive feedback mechanism. So we're going to get rid of A. Answer B does address positive feedback mechanism. Encourage more platelets to rush in. So encourage more platelets and encourage more platelets, encourage more platelets, and hope that we reset the system. So that's how we would kind of justify or rationalize why B is the right answer. All right, when we talk about the human body, we can kind of break it up into two portions. We have an axial portion and an appendicular portion. The axial portion consists of the head, the neck, and the trunk. And the trunk is just like your upper body, chest cavity. The appendicular portion is your upper limbs and your lower limbs, your arms and your legs. Limbs just means arms and legs. Now, with that, your shoulder and your pelvis falls under your upper and lower limbs as well. So maybe what I should do is kind of put that on there, which in another place I do. Anyway, but we also have cavities, and you will need to know some of the cavities as well. Your cranial cavity houses your brain, your vertebral cavity, or your vertebral canal, or your spinal cavity contains your spinal cord, your thoracic cavity houses your lungs, and your thoracic viscera. We'll talk about what all these mean later on. Abdominopelvic cavity contains your abdominal and your pelvic viscera. We'll talk about what viscera means. All right. So your diaphragm, that's your breathing muscle. And that muscle is going to separate your thoracic cavity, your upper chest cavity, from your abdominopelvic cavity, from your like stomach area. And we also have this thing called a mediastinum, which is kind of in between your thoracic cavity, and that's going to contain your heart, esophagus, trachea, and this thymus gland. And the interesting thing about the thymus gland, which I'll go off on a tangent a little bit, is that it's very prevalent as an infant. It provides a lot of immunity, but by the time you get to be an adult, about 80% of it is now fat, and it kind of shrinks up a little bit. All right, so your abdominopelvic cavity kind of has two portions, your abdominal cavity and your pelvic cavity. So your abdominal cavity goes from your diaphragm to the top of your pelvis. So that's where you're going to see your stomach, liver, spleen, kidney, small intestine, and a lot of your large intestine. Your pelvic cavity That's going to be where your hip bones are, your pelvic bones. So a little bit of your large intestine, your bladder, your internal reproductive organs. So here's just kind of like a picture version of what we see. So your cranial cavity, that should be an easy one. Your vertebral canal, your spinal canal, that should be an easy one. Your abdominopelvic cavity, which is your abdominal cavity and your pelvic cavity, that should be an easy one. So this is your diaphragm muscle right here. That separates your thoracic cavity from your abdominopelvic cavity. So that, like I said, your breathing muscle. So your thoracic cavity is kind of this whole cavity right here. Now, within the thoracic cavity, you kind of have several different pockets of cavities. You have a pleural cavity. You have that's your left and your right pleural cavity. That's going to be your lungs. Then you have your pericardial cavity, which contains your heart. Cardio means heart. And then you also have your mediastinal cavity. And if we go back up one, go back up, where is it? Mediastinal cavity, heart, esophagus, trachea, thymus gland. So your mediastinal cavity also contains your pleural cavity as well. Now, you will need to know where these cavities are in relationship to other cavities. So you could say, your cranial cavity is above the abdominopelvic cavity. All right, so now, which of the following diseases would originate in the abdominopelvic cavity? So, laryngitis. Laryngitis is a throat condition. That's like a sore throat. You have trouble speaking. So, asthma. Asthma is a lung condition. Myopia, nearsightedness, or pancreatitis. Pancreatitis, your pancreas would actually lie more right here. So we're going to go with pancreas. So pancreas would be our answer. So our throat cavity or laryngitis would be up here. Asthma would be in our pleural cavity. Myopia, nearsightedness, would be up here. We actually have an orbital cavity. And then pancreatitis would be our answer. And we'll see an example of the orbital cavity here later on. Now, for those of you going to nursing school, med school, you're going to have to know this one. This picture right here, this one's the easy one to remember. Left upper quadrant, left lower quadrant, right upper quadrant, right lower quadrant. So you would chart patient has vowel sounds in all four quadrants, or patient has diminished vowel sounds in the right lower quadrant, patient has tenderness in the right upper quadrant. Those are easy ones to remember. Now this picture on the left-hand side, this one's a little bit more confusing. I'll tell you right now, you have to know this slide, whether it's be for my class. For those of you, like I said, for nursing school, you're going to have to know it for nursing school. It will be on your NCLEX. You just have to know it, and then outside of once you get out of your NCLEX, chances are you'll never use it again. So we're going to start in the middle, the umbilical region. Umbilical means kind of like your belly button. Um, so umbilical is this middle region right here, and then lateral just means to the side. So you have your left lateral and your right lateral. So your left lateral's here and your right lateral's here. Then we all should know where our pubic region is. So there's our pubic region. And then if you've ever heard of an inguinal hernia, that's going to be down kind of where, like if you're sitting in your chair, where your leg fold, where your hip kind of folds in when you're sitting in a chair, where your leg kind of folds up at that 90-degree angle. So that would be your left inguinal region and your right inguinal region. And then up here, epigastric. So gastra, G-A-S-T-R, means stomach. And let's see. So GASTR means stomach. So here would be your epigastric region. And then remember that we had our CHONDR can have a couple different meanings, but in this case, it could mean ribs or cartilage. So because we are our ribs are here and we have cartilage here, we could have our left hypochondriac region and our right hypochondriac region. Hypo just means under, so underneath our ribs or underneath our cartilage, region. So just be familiar with this one. With this slide, like I said, you're going to need to know it. All right, so moving on, some cavities that you're going to find in the head. You know, we've already talked about our cranial cavity. Oral cavity, that's going to be your mouth. Nasal cavity, that's going to be your nose. Orbital, those are your eyes. Middle ear cavity, that's your middle ear. And then your sinus cavities, you know, we have different sinuses. Basically, anytime you see sinus, that's just kind of like an air-filled pocket. So if you have, and then we have different sinuses, like your frontal sinus, you have your sphenoid sinus. You're not going to have to remember the different ones. But if you get a sinus headache, basically you're having some gunk buildup in that air-filled pocket. All right, membranes. So I said that I use these terms, let's see, where I use these terms viscera earlier, and I said that I'd tell you about them later on. So we have membranes. We have a parietal and a visceral membrane. So basically, when we talk about the insides of our body, we have an organ, and that we have an organ that is inside of a cavity. And we're going to have kind of two membranes that are in that area. One membrane is going to line an organ, and one membrane is going to line a cavity. And between those membranes, we're going to see that there's this serous fluid, and it's basically a water-based fluid that is just there to prevent friction. So the visceral layer is what covers the organ, and the parietal layer or the parietal membrane lines the cavity. And the way that I remember it is, and I really don't know how to remember it any other way, is that visceral has the I right there, so that's going to be the inner one, so that's going to line the organ. Um, it's a stupid way to remember it. I don't know how else to remember it. So the visceral is the inner layer, which lines or which covers the organ. So um, we know that we have a heart, and the term for around is peri, P-E-R-I. So we have a pericardium. So we would have a visceral pericardium that surrounds the heart, and the parietal pericardium lines um, that pericardial cavity. Um, we have that pericardial cavity right here. So we have that visceral pericardium that surrounds the heart, and the parietal pericardium that lines the pericardial cavity. If we're talking about a lot of our abdominal pelvic organs, we call that our peritoneum. So we have a visceral peritoneum that would kind of cover our small intestines. And then we have a parietal peritoneum that would that would line that whole abdominopelvic cavity right here. We have lungs. That's in our thorax or our thoracic cavity. Remember that we call our thoracic cavity where we house our lungs that pleural cavity. So here we would, pleura is plural, and it's kind of hard to say. Pleura is plural, but plural, Pleural, is singular. So, so our visceral pleura would line or would cover the lungs, and the parietal pleura would line that thoracic cavity or that pleural cavity. All right. So also the exam and your quiz will cover questions or diseases and conditions that you may have never heard of. However, it's going to give you enough information that you should be able to answer the question. So here it says a pneumothorax, and basically that just means a collapsed lung. It's a condition that occurs when an air-filled space forms between the lung and the wall of the pleural cavity. So this space would be between which two layers? So basically we're looking at some visceral and parietal something. And remember, our lungs we're looking at that pleural cavity. So we're going to need something visceral and parietal pleura is hopefully what we're looking at. So parietal pleura and visceral pericardium. Well, that's the heart. So let's get rid of A. Parietal pericardium. Oh, no, that's the heart. Parietal pleura and visceral pleura. So far that's good. Visceral pericardium, nope, that's going to be the heart. And parietal pericardium, that's going to be the heart as well. So answer C is going to be our choice. So even if you have no idea what that question is asking, you should be able to recognize that the question is talking about the lungs or the pleural cavity. And answer C is the only answer that has both pleura in the answer. And you should know that cardi means heart. So answers A, B, and D both all contain the word pericardium, which refers to the heart. So you should be able to get this question right, even though you have no idea, or you might not have any idea what the question is asking. All right, so here I just want to show you, um, here, this is our heart right here. So we have, this right here would be our visceral pericardium. Then we'd have our parietal pericardium, and the black stuff would be our serous fluid to reduce friction. This is our lungs. So we'd have our visceral uh, our visceral layer, and then our parietal layer, our parietal pleura, and then our serous fluid here. Um, Here is just another example of more of like our abdominopelvic cavity, where we have different visceral and parietal layers filled with serous fluid. All right, so just some organ systems that we're going to be covering. We'll cover the integumentary system this semester. Integumentary system, that's our skin, hair, nails. It's our body covering. It does a lot with protection, body temperature regulation, production of vitamin D. You go outside, we need some sort of vitamin D. 25% of our vitamin D comes from sunlight. Skeletal system, we'll be covering that this semester. That support, movement of body part, provides our framework, protection of our internal organs. It's attachment site for muscles, storage of inorganic salts. Our bones store a lot of calcium and phosphorus, plus a lot of others. Production of blood cells. So inside of our bones, we actually have red bone marrow, yellow bone marrow, but our red bone marrow produces red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Muscular system, we'll go over that this semester. You should all know what the muscular system does: support movement of body parts. Main source of body heat. Remember I told you, you shiver, you break down ATP, produces heat. And then posture. All right, nervous system. We'll cover that this semester too. Basically, we receive nerve impulses, and then we have these things called neurotransmitters that will allow our nervous system to do its job. How do we create action potentials? Nervous system is very very quick on, quick off. We have a disease called Bell's palsy, which it's a nervous system disorder, causes paralysis or weakness on one side of the face that can mimic a stroke. You might see some facial drooping. We'll go over the endocrine system next semester. Endocrine system, it's going to be a hard chapter. We have a lot of chemical messengers. We have a lot of hormones involved in the endocrine system. Endocrine system and the nervous system are very, very closely related, but the endocrine system is much slower than the nervous system, and its effects are longer lasting than the endocrine system, or than the nervous system. Cardiovascular system, and the rest of these are going to be more next semester. Cardiovascular system, transport of gases, nutrients, blood cells, hormones, and wastes. Our cardiovascular system, we breathe in oxygen, breathe out carbon dioxide. We have to transport that oxygen to the cellular level so the cells can use that oxygen to release energy from food. And then the cells produce carbon dioxide, which goes back through our cardiovascular system. We breathe out that carbon dioxide. Lymphatic system. We all know that the lymphatic system uh, defends the body against um, defends the body against infection. But what most people don't know is that it carries fats from the digestive system to the blood. We'll talk a little bit about that in one of the chapters this semester. And then transports fluids from tissue spaces to the blood. Remember that I talked about that interstitial fluid and edema. We'll talk a little bit about how that happens. All right, digestive system. We know we eat food, we break down food. We're going to absorb those digested products, those nutrients, and then we're going to excrete the waste products. Respiratory system. We're going to breathe in, breathe out. We exchange carbon dioxide and oxygen, and then we absorb that oxygen. Urinary system. We have the kidney that are the kidneys that remove waste products. We have kidneys also regulate electrolyte water balance, produces urine, and we excrete that urine outside of our body. All right, reproductive system. This will be the very last chapter we cover in AMP2. We have male and female reproductive system that produces and transports sex cells. We produce hormones, we produce organisms, and then also females provide fetal development, childbirth. You will need to know the general differences between the male and female anatomy. And like, for example, males, which I would hope by now you should know these. Like for the reproductive system, males, they're going to have a scrotum. Females have a vulva, uterus, and uterine tubes. Kidneys are part of the urinary system. One thing that I mentioned earlier is that the pancreas is part of the endocrine system because it helps regulate blood sugar levels. Your blood glucose level is too high, pancreas dumps out some insulin. It's an endocrine organ. However, the pancreas also falls under the digestive system because the pancreas releases a lot of digestive system hormones that will break down some of the food that we eat. So the pancreas is one of the very few organs, or the only organ that falls in multiple categories. So the pancreas is an endocrine organ and a digestive organ as well. All right, lifespan changes. What happens as we get old? Some of us, our hair turns gray or white. Our skin wrinkles, sags due to loss of that subcutaneous fat, that adipose tissue. Elastin, collagen. We'll talk about elastin and collagen in chapter 6, maybe. Our skin stiffens a little bit. Our joints stiffen. We get elevated blood pressure that might lead to hypertension. We have elevated blood glucose levels. We might develop type 2 diabetes. Our tissues and organs shrink. They atrophy. Atrophy is just another word for kind of waste away. Cells reach the end of their ability to undergo cell division. If you remember mitosis or mitosis, as they lose the tips of chromosomes, we'll talk about that in a subsequent chapter. Our metabolic rate decreases. You can't eat that extra large pizza that you used to be able to eat without gaining 42 pounds. We decrease production of enzymes and other proteins. We develop dementia, Alzheimer's disease. A lot of things happen as we get older. All right. What is a characteristic that many centenarians share? So a centenarian basically is a person that lives to be 100 years or older. This one, unless you read the textbook, you're not going to know. So basically, they've never smoked. So a characteristic among many people that live to be more than 100, they've never smoked. When does cell death first occur? So up here, I didn't tell you up here, but when does cell death first occur? We'll actually see it occurs during fetal development. You're actually when you're in the womb, your hands are webbed and kind of like a duck, and we have these special cells that will come in and kind of unweb your hand and kind of kill off those cells. All right, anatomical position. You're going to have to know anatomical position. Your body is upright, your head's to the front, your arms are down at your sides, and your palms are facing forward. And this is the key thing, your palms are facing forward. Typically when we stand at our side, or when we stand up and our hands are down, our palms are kind of facing towards our legs. That is not anatomical position. And this is not just United States, this is universal across the world. And this just helps us to be able to have some sort of consistency, across the world. So if I said that I had a 2 centimeter laceration above my wrist, what does that mean? Is that if I'm holding my arm up, is that 2 centimeter laceration here? Which side is it, on my palm side or the back of my hand? But if my hand is down, is that 2 centimeter laceration here or here on my forearm or the back? So when we write in medical terminology, we know what we're saying based on anatomical position. And also, what if you're in the middle of the woods and you're out hiking and you stumble across a body, or actually you just stumble across an arm, and the medical examiner only has an arm to work with, and they're trying to identify landmarks. They can write their medical description based on if they had a full body and the body was upright and their arms were hanging down to the side and the palms were facing forward. Now, some of the terms that you have to know and that we will be using in this class is that and this is kind of where we get into kind of medical writing. Superior means above. So your cranial cavity is superior to your abdominal pelvic cavity. Inferior means below. Your abdominal pelvic cavity is inferior to your cranial cavity. Anterior means towards the front. Posterior means towards the back. So your belly button is, or your umbilicus is anterior to your spinal cord. Your belly button is towards the back when compared to your spinal cord. Your spinal cord is posterior to your umbilicus or your belly button. Ventral and dorsal both mean towards the front and towards the back. Now, it depends on what area of biology you're working in. Some people, I would say most people will use the terms anterior, posterior as opposed to ventral and dorsal. But just so you know, some people will say ventral and dorsal, depending on what area of biology you're working in. Medial, towards the midline, lateral, away from midline. Your umbilicus, your belly button, is medial towards your versus your arms. Your arms are lateral compared to your umbilicus. Ipsilateral just means the same side. Contralateral means opposite sides. You have contralateral kidneys. You have kidneys that are on opposite sides. You have 5 ipsilateral toes. You have 5 toes that are on the same side. Superficial just means closer to the body surface. Deep means more internal. So you could have a superficial cut, like a paper cut is superficial, but a knife cut that bleeds a lot would be more deep. Now, proximal and distal. These are a little bit harder to understand, and they can only be used when you're talking about your limbs, your arms and your legs. And basically, the definition of proximal means closer to the point of attachment to the trunk, and distal means further away from the point of attachment to the trunk. So let's think about your arm. Your arm, the point of attachment to the trunk of your arm is your shoulder. For your leg, the point of attachment to the trunk is your hip. So basically, if you're comparing something to something else, you're comparing it to the shoulder or the hip. So you would say that your elbow is proximal to your wrist. Your elbow is closer to the point of attachment than your wrist is. Your elbow is proximal to your wrist, or your wrist is more distal, further away from the point of attachment than your elbow is. Or you could use your leg. Your knee is proximal to your ankle. Your knee is closer to the point of attachment, your hip, than your ankle is. Or your ankle is distal than your knee. Your ankle is further away from the point of attachment, your hip, than your ankle is. Bilateral structures. Structures meaning that you have structures on both sides. Kidneys, lungs, eyes, ears. You should know ovaries. You should know what structures by now that are on both sides. Now, you will need to know these definitions in relationship to anatomical reference points, such as a bone or a region. So, let's see. Let me advance. All right, we'll go over an example of that here in a second. All right, so here's just a picture version of kind of what we just went over, of the definitions that we just went over. All right, so the thoracic cavity is blank to the abdominopelvic cavity. So inferior means below. Ventral or anterior means towards the front. Dorsal or posterior means towards the back. Superior means above. So your thoracic cavity is blank to the abdominopelvic cavity. Your thoracic cavity is above the abdominopelvic cavity. So you would say the thoracic cavity is superior to the abdominopelvic cavity. So you're going to have to know your definitions in relationship to other reference points. All right, we also have different planes of view. So if you go get an x-ray done or an MRI done, we can have different kind of cuts is what we call them. We can have a sagittal cut or a longitudinal cut. And basically that's going to divide the body into a left and right portion. You could have a mid-sagittal cut, which would divide the body into equal left and right portions, or a parasagittal section, which would kind of divide the body into unequal portions. So if you're kind of looking at your shoulder this way, you would have a parasagittal section. Transverse or horizontal section would just be cutting your body kind of in half in a top to bottom portion. Frontal or coronal section divides the body into a front and back section, an anterior posterior view. So with that said, a body has been sectioned in a way that both the lungs and the urinary bladder are visible. What type of section was used? So a horizontal section divides the body into superior and inferior. So here would be the horizontal. So if I cut the body here, would I be able to see the lungs and the urinary bladder? No. So what about a frontal section? Divides the body into anterior and posterior. So we're looking at this plane. So if I look at this, I could see the lungs here, and I could see the urinary bladder here. So that's a viable answer. A sagittal section would cut the body here. I might be able to, depending on if it was depending on where I cut the body. So we're going to get rid of that because depending on where I cut it, I might be able to, but a frontal section is a better option. Transverse is the same thing as horizontal, and we've already gotten rid of horizontal. So our answer is going to be B. And we can also do cuts with the brain as well. You can do the sagittal, the same type of cuts. We also have the only thing that I wanted to point out, we have our cross section here, our horizontal, but we can also have an oblique cut as well. That's just one thing that was not mentioned on this slide. Typically, we don't do an oblique section when we're doing imaging, like an X-ray or an MRI, but we might do an oblique cut if we're, cutting a bone. But we still have our longitudinal and our cross section here. All right, so here is here's just a picture of basically the medical term and a non-medical term. So cephalic means head, occipital means back of the head, acromial means shoulder, vertebral, spinal column, brachial means arm. As we go through AMP1 and AMP2, by the time you get through both AMP1, AMP2, you should have all of these memorized: popliteobacomy, sural cap. We've already talked about some of them. Inguinal means groin, umbilical means your belly button or your navel. You should know all of these by the time you get through AMP1 and AMP2. Once you get out into the medical field, if that's where you're going, kinesiology, sports medicine, nursing, and you do your charting, you will be charting in medical terminology. Um, so kind of learn these. Um, Now, the one thing I like about this one is that not only does it give you um, the noun form, but it gives you the adjective form as well. So um, the cervicus means neck, or cervical is the adjective form. Um, the mentis means chin, or mental is an adjective form. So you could say the patient broke his femur, or the patient has pain in his femoral region. Um, the patient has uh, lumbar sacral pain, or that one wasn't a good example, so we won't use that. Let's see. So just start memorizing as we go through the chapters. Just kind of keep this as a reference for the nouns and the adjective form. So that brings us to the end of chapter 1. So if you need anything, please let me know. I will do my best to answer your questions, and have a good day. Bye.